There's a moment where everything just stops making sense. You wake up, you go through your day, you do the same things you've always done, but something feels off, like you're disconnected from your own life, like you're moving but not really going anywhere. And that's the strangest part. You can't always explain why. Nothing is necessarily wrong, but nothing feels right either. Hi, I'm Paul, and this is Tarot Logic. Let's talk about that feeling, because if you're here, there's a good chance you've been asking yourself some version of this question. Why do I feel so lost right now? And more importantly, what am I supposed to do about it? Here's the part most people don't say out loud. Feeling lost is not just confusion. It's disorientation at the level of identity. It's not just, I don't know what to do next. It's, I don't know who I am anymore. And that's why it feels so heavy. Because when your sense of self starts to destabilize, everything else starts to feel unstable too. Your decisions, your relationships, your motivation, your sense of purpose. You might notice things like you don't feel excited about the things you used to care about. You second-guess decisions that used to feel obvious. You feel like you're drifting, even when you're staying busy. Or maybe you catch yourself thinking, is this really my life? And that question can be unsettling because it implies something deeper. It implies that the version of you that built your current life might not be the version of you that's living it anymore. Yeah, psychologically, this is something Carl Jung talked about extensively. He believed that the personality we develop early in life is only partial. It's kind of a survival structure. We build it based on expectations, conditioning, what gets rewarded, what gets accepted. But over time, parts of us that were ignored or suppressed start to push back. Not aggressively at first, subtly, through dissatisfaction, through boredom, through that quiet sense that something is missing. James Hollis describes this as the moment when the false self begins to crack, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. And when that crack starts to form, your psyche begins asking a new question. Not, how do I succeed? But what is actually true for me? And that's where things start to feel confusing. Because truth is not always aligned with the life you've built. Now let's layer in the neuroscience. Because this isn't just philosophical, it's biological. Your brain is constantly predicting your future based on your past. It builds patterns, habits, expectations. And when one of the key systems involved in this is dopamine, we have to understand that dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's about anticipation. It's about the feeling that something ahead of you matters, that it's worth moving toward. When you feel lost, what's often happening is this. The things that used to give you a sense of forward momentum no longer activate that system in the same way. Your brain is basically saying, I've already learned this pattern. There's nothing new here. So motivation drops. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain no longer sees meaning in the trajectory you're on. And without that sense of meaning, everything starts to feel flat. Even things that should feel good. And so then you find yourself in this strange position. You don't want what you used to want, but you don't yet know what you want instead. And that space in between, that's where people feel lost. But here's the shift. That space is not a failure. It's a transition. And in symbolic language, this is where tarot actually becomes useful, not as prediction, but as pattern recognition. There's a card that captures this experience almost perfectly, and that's the Eight of Cups. Shows a figure walking away from something, right, that once mattered, not because it was bad, but because it's no longer enough. And that distinction is important. Because a lot of people wait for something to fall apart before they give themselves permission to change. But the Eight of Cups is different. It's the moment where you leave, even though things very often still feel fine. And that's what makes it uncomfortable. Because there's not always a clear, justification, just a feeling. And that feeling is easy to dismiss. Easy to rationalize away. Easy to ignore. So what do most people do? They try to fix the feeling by going backwards. They double down on old goals. They try to force motivation. They distract themselves. They tell themselves, I just need to get back on track. But the truth is, sometimes the track itself might be the problem. And forcing yourself forward on a path that no longer fits you, well, that doesn't resolve the feeling. It deepens it. Let's make this more real. Imagine someone who built their identity around being successful. They worked hard. They achieved things, They became the person others expected them to be. And for a while it worked. But then something shifts. They hit their goals. And instead of feeling fulfilled, they feel empty. So, what do? They set bigger goals, more ambitious ones, But the emptiness doesn't go away. Because the issue was never the size of the goal. It was the alignment of the goal. Or think about relationships. You might be in something stable, predictable, comfortable. But there's a quiet voice in the background that keeps asking, is this it? And that's a question that can feel quite dangerous, because it threatens that very stability. But ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just pushes it deeper. So what do you actually do when you feel lost? First, you stop trying to solve it immediately. That might sound counterintuitive, right? But this phase is not about clarity yet. It's about awareness. You're not lost because you don't have answers. You feel lost because the old answers no longer apply. And forcing new answers too quickly usually leads you right back into another version of the same pattern. Second, you start paying attention to what no longer feels true. Not what you should want, not what makes sense on paper, but what actually feels misaligned, because that's where the signal is. Your discomfort is not random, it's directional. And third, you allow space for uncertainty. Now, this is the hardest part, because your brain wants resolution. It wants certainty, right? It wants a plan. But transformation doesn't work that way. There's a phase where you're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. And that phase feels like drifting. But it's actually reorganization. And fourth, you start experimenting instead of committing. Small shifts, new inputs, different environments, different conversations. Not to figure it all out, but to expose yourself to possibilities that your current identity hasn't explored yet. Because, clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from experiencing differently. And finally, you reframe the entire experience. Feeling lost is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is changing within you. Something deeper than your current structure can hold. That's uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. Because the alternative, staying in a life that no longer fits, well, over time, that becomes its own kind of suffering. So if you're at that space right now, where things feel unclear, where you don't feel like yourself, where the future feels uncertain, take a breath. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're in transition. And that feeling, as disorienting as it is often the beginning of something far more aligned than what came before.